You know, even with the shortcomings that sometimes appear in his signature style, like obsession with needle drops of music he loves, regularly changing lesser-known characters' personalities and backstories to fit his story in a way that can sometimes make them lose essence from their conception, but creates a newer version of them that the wider audience gets to become attached to since he usually makes them more sympathetic and likable. James Gunn's done a pretty good job so far. I mean, he made one of the best movies ever made, Scooby-Doo. Then he went on to make some lesser-known movies about these weird little guys called the Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't know if you've heard about them. There's like a tree and a raccoon and some other guys. But then he got fired for being too edgy 10 years ago and showed Zack Snyder how to make a good movie. DC had forgotten what one felt like, so gave him the keys to City Hall, and he became the mayor. But first, we got a season of a show that was a sequel to said movie, Peacemaker, focusing on John Cena's character after he got Charlie Kirked. Thankfully though, Chris Smith ain't no bitch, and he thugged that shit out. But after his adventures in the DCEU, Jimmy Goon started to work on his own universe. And he didn't want to erase his own work. So he had a plan. A horrible, terrible, devilish plan. To just rewrite the universe continuities with Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad. And this gave us Peacemaker Season 2. A project that James has said includes some of his favourite things he's done in his entire career. Namely the last 2 episodes. This season dropped after the roaring success that was James Gunn's Superman, which finally revitalized the guy after his name was dragged through the mud for years by mainstream media. So hype was pretty high, especially since everyone wanted to see that intro dance again. I liked Peacemaker Season 1. I think it was pretty funny. It had a batshit plot very fitting of a sequel to the Suicide Squad, and it had some pretty solid character work. If this show didn't exist, I'd only know Daniel Brooks from the Minecraft movie, and I wouldn't want anyone to be condemned to a fate as bad as that. I really like John Cena in this role and think he knows exactly how to play it and balance the serious and goofy natures of it. And it goes without saying, but a highlight is absolutely Freddie Stromer as Vigilante. Yes, this is a completely different Vigilante to the comics, but he plays him in such an interesting way, being this grey morality, dark, woke killer of criminals who is perfectly fine with murder but wouldn't dare think about another crime like stealing. It also made some background characters from other movies into much more fleshed out people, namely Economos and Harcourt. Seeing them outside their jobs under Amanda Waller was pretty cool, and I was excited to be reunited with the 11th Street Kids again. So, Peacemaker Season 2 follows Chris Smith, the Peacemaker, played by John Cena, the man who once said he would do anything for freedom, and kill every man, woman, and child that gets in his way. After the butterfly incident of Season 1, Chris wants to put his superhero persona to good use, and decides to sign with none other than the Justice Gang. That's right, we're in the DCU now, baby. And if you're wondering how they resolved the ending of Peacemaker Season 1, they just retconned it, from the DCEU to the DCU, which makes sense to me personally. So, instead of Chris walking past the Justice League and jabbing at Aquaman, he's instead met with the Justice Gang plus Superman and Supergirl, as they were content to just be showing up to do them a favour rather than being permanent additions. And he jabs at Guy Gardner, which he probably deserves it. Now, it's clear that Guy didn't appreciate this because he's an absolute dick in this interview, and Hawkgirl stuns for her 5-minute appearance. Because Isabella Merced is a queen. After being thoroughly rejected though, Chris doesn't know what to do anymore. His sins of the past means he can't become a government agent or a superhero. So he turns to his closest friends, Leota Adebayo, played by Danielle Brooks, daughter of Amanda Waller and former agent for a company turned private detective, always being there for support. Ad isn't in the best situation with her wife, and her loneliness leads to her bond with Chris being stronger than ever, and this causes the 11th Street Kids to get back together for a party, baby, bringing back fan favorite Adrian Chase, aka Vigilante, played by Freddie Stromer, the lovable autistic coded dork who is golden retriever levels of loyal when it comes to Chris, and is ready to do anything with him and the rest of the gang, including a spree of murders. John Economos, played by Steve Agee, the tech guy who flips everyone off in the Suicide Squad, is back again and balancing his intelligence and clumsiness just as much. Finally, we see Amelia Harcourt, played by Jennifer Holland, who is also James Gunn's wife. The on and off love interest of Chris despite being his polar opposite, a quiet badass who only just opens up enough to be let in by the rest of the gang. But after reconnecting with everyone, Chris still feels a hole that he can't fill. He doesn't have blood family anymore, just Eagly, the most important member of the gang, and his pet eagle companion. And the 11th Street Kids. This is when he finds an old possession of his father's, a small little rounded box that opens a door to what seems to be a vast room filled with doors. He used to use it as a storage space for his equipment, but he never ventured into the other doors. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but never the eagle though. And Chris goes inside one, only to be met with an identical replica of his house, complete with his father alive again, and even his brother who died as a child, grown up and happy to see him. But worst of all, he comes face to face with himself, and this version isn't going to let him off without a warning. Now, we all know how prevalent multiversal stories have gotten in recent memory. Spider-Verse happened and was incredible, and then everyone wanted a piece of that bag. The MCU is even going down that route to mixed reception. But that doesn't mean all multiversal stories are bad, even if multiverse fatigue is kinda real. Everything Everywhere All at Once was a Best Picture winner after all. And sure, a ton of superhero media is going to follow in Spider-Verse's footsteps, but I have to say, Peacemaker Season 2 using an alternate reality that acts as forbidden fruit to Chris, and gives him the opportunity to live in a world that appeals to him and he thinks appreciates him a hell of a lot more than his current one, is actually really compelling. I mean, the first season focuses on Chris a lot more as a superhero, and how his life is after escaping prison, since that's where he was before the Suicide Squad. But James Gunn said that this season was more about him as a person, his relationships, his struggles, and his insecurities. And all of that really comes out. John Cena gives debatably his most emotional performance here, unless you count Fred 3, Camp Fred. And it's insane that he still gets lumped into the wrestler-turned-actor group that The Rock is in, because that is quite the insult. We see glimpses of Chris's issues in the last season, namely his relationship with his father, who is a terrible person, and being haunted by his memory after putting his ass down. His memories of his brother and dealing with the guilt of killing him as a child on accident, and his view of masculinity being tarnished due to the male role models in his life. I really love the handling of Chris's bisexuality, because it's pretty subtle when it comes into conversation. There's a line that I really liked because I don't think most people even picked up on it. I don't remember the exact line, but he basically said something in a romantic context, first using person, and then correcting himself to woman, hiding the fact that he also likes other men because he's still scared of how he'll be seen that way. I mean, his whole thing is loving peace and America and being a corrupted version of Captain America. And America, be homophobic. And this is very much continued into the second season. We see a Chris that is finally trying to confront all of these feelings, although he doesn't understand how to properly do so. He'd never talk about his feelings with Adrian, Economos, or Harcourt, and Adebayo is busy with their career and marriage. So he's taking all the unhealthy options, sex, drugs, alcohol, trying his hardest to make a relationship with Harcourt work because he prioritizes being desired and respected over actually feeling self-confident and worthy of happiness. I was so excited at the start of the season because of how well they were handling this conflict, and I think that through the show, it really works as an emotional core from beginning to end. The characterization, however, is not my main problem with the show. As it was going on, it was clear that there were some massive pacing issues. The first 3 episodes run smoothly, and then episodes 4 and 5 feel like nothing happened. And what does happen never really gets explained. They very much just set up things to be answered in the future, or just build up to the progression of the plot. And the highlight is eagerly aura farming, of course. But this kind of just creates a gap where once the show is ended, you can see exactly what could have been cut or pushed back to create more space to flesh out the plot. Since it's after this where things really pick up due to the other world becoming much more prominent. And these are probably the best episodes of the show, the whole 2 of them. It feels weird because of how much they built up this other world and how much they left to be explored later and just kind of didn't. Like, there's plenty of things you could question that were just brought up and never explored, and even more fan theories that I was excited to see potentially come to fruition. I mean, Rick Flag Jr. shows up like twice, and just never again. What was up with that? And speaking of Rick Flag, one big issue a lot of people have with the show, and the DCU so far as a whole that I kind of agree with, is that Rick Flag Sr. is not that interesting. He's been prominent in every single DCU project so far, and just like, Like, he's a fine villain due to his motivations and morally dubious actions, but we already went through this with Amanda Waller, and she felt infinitely more intimidating and interesting. Especially in The Suicide Squad, when it felt she had finally tasted what it feels like to lose power. Hopefully Waller does come back, because Viola Davis was perfect casting for that role, and she'd fit right in with the Peacemaker gang again. We only saw her once or twice in Season 1 after all. And I think people are associating the Rick Flag Sr. focus with old Jimmy Boy because he casts actors he's friends with and changes characters to be what he thinks are cool and fair, but I think it's necessarily a bad thing that he wants Frank Grillo in the spotlight or to build up a human villain across the series that isn't normally a big deal. But I don't know, it just feels like it could be a bit better. When you're balancing Lex Luthor as a recurring villain, whoever will show up in Man of Tomorrow and Lanterns with the potential of Amanda Waller, and Rick Flag Sr., it just doesn't mesh all that well in the long run. But maybe it's just growing pains and his plan will come into, and all the parts of his plan will come together nicely. Speaking of characters, this season has the addition of 2. Kinda. I mean, there's a lot more because of the duplicates in the other world. Speaking of, I think all of them do a great job playing different versions of the character. The highlight, of course, being Jennifer Holland's performance and how varied her two versions are. She kind of flies under the radar because of how funny some of the other ones are, or the emotional moments with others. But the actual added new characters are, of course, Michael Rooker as this bird specialist the government pays after Eagly beats their ass, and of course, Tim Meadows as Langdon, a new agent working with economos and professional at being bird blind. Now, if you know Boar like I do, you'll recognize Tim Meadows from a small little 2004 movie called Mean Girls, and you'll be just as excited as I was to see him again. And he's just as funny as ever. I was genuinely such a huge fan of his character, and I'm so excited for the potential of seeing him again in the future. The most heavy discussion of the season, however, comes in the later 3 episodes. So blah blah blah, spoilers ahead if you still want to watch Peacemaker Season 2. Then skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. 3, 2, 1... Julian, It's a Hungry World. Okay, so the Earth X twist is actually really well handled, even if we saw it coming. The tension in the parts with Judah Master and Adebayo running from the mob are great, the commentary on white privilege and people with the power to do something that don't with Chris's father is excellent and really funny, and Adrian was so fucking valid when he just shanked his ass. Speaking of, the 2 Adrians are the best part of the entire season. Their banter is extremely funny, and it's hilarious in retrospect that they decided to make Adrian funnier by just giving him another hymn to bounce off of. Plus, his favorite Pokemon is Infernape, which is goated. Really though, his "are you fucking kidding me?" has been burned into my brain since I first heard it. I do like the commentary they tried to put in about how Earth X isn't as different as the real world as we hope it would be, although it was a little ham-fisted and underexplored. And I really liked what they were saying with what they were setting up with Keith. It feels like he's a perfect villain for Chris to have to face because he represents his own inner demons. And while the scene of him breaking down as the 11th Street kids stop beating his ass in the court retweets was really emotional, he just leaves the show. I thought he would have to fistfight Chris, and it would be a reflection of their fight in childhood. Plus, it would help to fully realize the themes of Chris having to cut family ties because they're terrible people. And that some people gotta fucking die. Alongside this, I thought that Vigilante 2 was gonna die and Chris wasn't gonna realize that it was the other one and not his Vigilante. And then once he saw Vigilante Prime, he'd be thankful for him being alive and treasure their relationship, finally showing the appreciation Adrian has wanted since season 1. Plus he probably would have cried, and they could call back to the scene of him reading Chris's letter and then crying, then denying it to Adebayo. But instead, the finale was the most unfocused episode of the entire show. I mean, you have Chris going to prison, then getting broken out by Adrian's drug money that he refused to use at first, which is fine. But then Chris going off on his own to sulk gets talked to by Adebayo in a really cool scene of realizing his character. But then he only cares about when Harcourt says what they went through did matter to her, and like, huh? That's all that matters? I understand that that's what he wants, but it kind of annoys me that it wasn't through Daniel Brooks acting her ass off in a great speech that he finally decided to keep moving forward and be himself, and in that confidence, maybe slowly growing closer to Harcourt, but whatever. What really annoyed people is that the huge cameos in the last episode were just the band that sings the intro song because James Gunn really likes them. The Lex cameo was really effective though, and it was great seeing Nicholas Hoult again. Although I didn't expect him to have such intimate knowledge of gay culture. And then they spent most of it setting up more stuff in the DCU. I just wish it took the time to analyze the characters and give them their own satisfying send-offs instead of one big one that is probably going to end up being picked up for its own show. Because it's cool, don't get me wrong, but it didn't feel like all the loose ends were tied up. The Sons of Liberty were never brought up again. We never saw Economos on FX. We saw Rick Flag Jr. like twice and then he stopped showing up. Keith was set up and nothing ever happened with him. It felt quite sloppy watching it for the first time. And yeah, I know the montage of Rick Flag Sr.'s crew going into the other worlds and meeting the weird shit in there was so Langdon would join the 11th Street Kids. But even then it felt out of nowhere and took a long time. It did show Rick Flag Sr. as a more villainous character though, so I feel like a lot of my complaints with this season would be lessened if it weren't for the confirmation that we're not getting a Peacemaker Season 3. This is the end of the show, and yeah, these characters are going to return, probably in their own show, since that's what the ending is setting up. But at the same time, it just feels like, and they won't pick up on the loose threads that have been left through Peacemaker Season 2. And it's just a real shame for that, because there's a lot of potential here that I think could make for good television. That's probably the end of spoilers though. Overall, Peacemaker Season 2 is very sloppy. It has a lot of writing problems, and I feel like it struggled under the weight of the DCU having just started. It sets up a lot, but it doesn't do much in and of itself. I would have preferred the season just focusing on the 11th Street kids, Chris, and the newer characters. It would have been more enjoyable and satisfying. And Jimmy Goo needs to shut up already and stop getting our expectations too high. It's really hating his projects. That being said, I still have high hopes for Supergirl, Lanterns, and beyond. I still love Superman, and I'm glad that DC is having a rebirth. Just, please take care with casting Batman. Like, ideally, it'd just be Pattinson again, but if you have to recast, then find someone right. This is getting off topic, though. Overall, I did enjoy Peacemaker Season 2, but it just had so many issues that I can't really give it a high score. With its great and emotional acting, further characterization that builds upon the themes of the last season, unfortunately disappointing second half, and terrible pacing of the season, I'm giving Peacemaker Season 2 a 5.5 out of 10. I really wish it didn't end this way, and need to see Adrian again soon. And if you don't want to get sent to the horny gnome dimension, I'd recommend subscribing. The YouTube algorithm is mean to smaller content creators like me, and every little helps. Plus, you can always unsubscribe whenever you want. Only 0.3% of my viewers are subscribed anyway, so please check if you're in the majority. If you enjoyed this video, then like it. If not, that's okay. I still hope you have a great day. Make sure to take care, and remember to have fun. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.